You're so funny, Jennifer. I think you're really funny, right? Okay, I hope this
I
comes
think
out. Yeah, are
I
you?
think I'm funny, but yeah.
Welcome, everyone, to the Stoic Salon podcast, where we talk about life, love, work, play, the universe, and Stoicism. Today, I'm going to be talking with Jennifer Baker. Jennifer Baker teaches Stoic ethics at the College of Charleston, and she writes on how to apply Stoicism to contemporary ethical issues in life and, interestingly, in economics. She's the author of over 24 articles in philosophy, and she's also the co-editor of Economics and the Virtues for Oxford University Press. She's currently working on a book manuscript on economics and moral indifference, and I'm really keen on asking her, what relationship should we have with money? I mean, we'll talk about all sorts of things. I'm also curious about how she came to find Stoicism and why Stoicism informs the work that she does. And and then we'll get into some economics. Sounds like a very interesting chat. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's get going. So welcome everyone to the Stoic Salon podcast, where we talk about life, love, work, play, the universe, and Stoicism. And today I'm really excited to be talking with Jennifer Baker. Jennifer, welcome. How are you?
Hello. I'm really looking forward to this. It's a treat.
Yeah, me too. All right. So I've kind of just started this podcast, and I was kind of initially thinking of giving it a tagline of flow to flourish. So that's not the tagline anymore. It's kind of a work in progress, but I am really interested in this idea of, living in accordance with nature and how that leads us to flourish.
Yeah.
That, of course, ties in with the women's conference that we're both going to be at, and you'll be presenting.
Yeah.
So the concept of flourishing. And then I kind of want to know, because I'm very curious, I've asked everyone so far, what's the path to flourishing? Like, what was life before Stoicism? What was the point at which you met Stoicism? What happened? Did someone give you a book? Did someone say, read this? Did something happen? How was that? Was it instantly pivotal? Was it, and then the after? So we'll start there, if you like.
Yeah. Well, I actually do remember when I was exposed to Stoicism, and I'm not sure my approach is atypical, but I was probably younger than most people are because I was just a college student, and I had tried, I was interested in philosophy in high school, of course. And so I had read all the typical things that people are usually inspired by in high school, but nothing really stuck. And I ended up becoming a philosopher, probably because I had, questions and doubts about everything that, was available and presented. So I was studying in Ireland. I was overseas, and I was just doing that thing that good students do. I hope they still do this today, but where you just kind of hang out in a library and grab the interesting books off the shelf and look. And the best book I had ever run across was Martha Nussbaum's Love's Knowledge. I just couldn't put it down. I mean, I think I made it to, lights out at the library. So it was so much better than any of the other books I typically enjoyed, doing that. What do they call it? The library fairy, letting the library fairy pick the books for me. And after I read the thing, I flip it over, and she's at my home institution at Brown University. But she is very pro-Aristotelian in that book, and was at the time. And so when I was finally able to take her courses, I think I got to take a few, she was really a proponent of the Aristotelian view, and in contrast to the Stoic view that we knew nothing about. I mean, I remembered Seneca from descriptions of Shakespeare, but, I think I knew nothing about Seneca, even though I'd written his name in test answers, for years. And so she would advocate for the Aristotelian view, and I think I was sold, but there was always an element of explanation that was kind of poetic, or kind of, life is tragic. And so we appreciate that. Like not everything was tied together, and that was supposed to be a good thing. And then when I got to graduate school, I had Julia Annis as my professor, and she doesn't push any, she wasn't promoting Stoicism or Aristotelianism, but she was so good at explaining Stoicism that it ended up just being the view that was better knit together. Even though it was very uncool back then to be a Stoic. I mean, I think in some ways it's still a little uncool to abuse, but I couldn't resist it because it made it, there were better explanations. And if I'm not rambling too much, one example I remember Nussbaum using was that there was a student that got sent to do like some sociology, anthropology type work up in the tundra. And she got there and she found out that everyone was already converted to some type of Christianity. It ruined her project. So she just spent a season there and discovered there was a lot of Stoicism in the practice of these people that she was, visiting. And one bit of the Stoicism was that if children would expire, you didn't have the ability to bury them when it was so cold. So they would kind of, remain somewhat exposed, or, from a perspective exposed. And the way Nussbaum presented it, as I remember, was that would be the Stoic option. Like a Stoic would choose that kind of harshness as admirable or even good, or I don't know, it really seemed repellent, of course. And then I must have brought that example up again in one of Julia Annis's courses. And she had the best, like, kind of British philosopher kind of response, which was just, what else would you have them do? So the way Nussbaum had it presented was like, do you choose a harsh life or do you choose a softer, gentler life full of music and poetry and nuance? But that was not the right way to think of the choices, I ended up believing. And then, of course, Nussbaum's kind of come around to Stoicism. So that's been really nice to watch from afar.
Has she she's still, where would you position her?
We use her a lot in my classes on emotion. And she's, I really admire how she does it. I think she thinks it's best to work free from ethical theory, which, if I were her, I would maybe do that too. But, she borrows so heavily from the Stoics that with my students, we're constantly, maybe we don't have to remind ourselves, but, there's the Nussbaumian account, then the Stoic account, and there's a lot of overlap, which, we usually think is great.
I'm really fascinated that you were won over by the Stoics when you had like Aristotle and Nussbaum, like just, wow. Because that's cool. I studied philosophy at Sydney Uni. And so I remember back in the day, with philosophy, you did Plato, the pre-Socratics, Plato, Aristotle, and then you skipped all the rest and you jumped ahead to, I don't know, Hume, Locke, and the other dude. And and so I didn't encounter Stoicism on campus, but down the road at the Greek tavern, chatting with a guy who was from Cyprus, so Zeno was like king, and I didn't, the Stoics didn't win me over until very, very recently. So what was it? Can you pitch both? Imagine you're like branding and like selling it. What was it that sold you? Because you said it was the more coherent or coherent theory?
It's almost as if the Stoics finished the account. So, I'd have to say it was Julia Annis's teaching, because if I were just using the passages, it's amazing to me how many people teach even virtue ethics, and if you get them outside of class, they're like, I really have no idea what's going on there. We get presented things in these wooden ways, and, I'm not a fan of, Aristotle on friendship, memorize, so it's not that I had Stoicism presented in that wooden way. It was presented in a very dynamic way by Annis, so she's capable of seeing, I think she's made the case that these eudaimonious accounts all share theoretical structure in common. And then when you approach it that way, where Aristotle puzzles over things, which, I was reading carefully back then too. It probably helped that I was working on the Greek, but when you read him carefully, you don't miss the times where he kind of throws his hands up. And then the Stoics just answered the questions. So it was, it was like I had no choice, because it's like, okay, here's a great approach to ethics, explains a ton. Would you rather stick with Aristotle, who leaves these 4 things unsettled and is, ambiguous in various ways? What do you need for happiness? Not quite clear. Or would you like the Stoics, who kind of, finish the homework?
Can you give me one example of where Aristotle's like ambivalent?
Yeah, like
and then the Stoics.
So like when Aristotle worries about the role of external goods in our happiness, he'll talk about how a life is blessed if it has external goods, and it's hard to figure out where that fits into eudaimonism. Like, oh, is this a new category? What does this mean? He worries about, if we can be harmed after we pass away by terrible things happening to our children, strong intuitive pulls there. He also is less clear than the Stoics about the kind of trade-offs we have to make. That's what I've been working on lately, like the role of indifference in the way we practically reason in Stoicism. So with Aristotle, you kind of get some hand waving, just like make the best choice. Just like virtue's very valuable, but you always need to make the best choice. Like how valuable, how do these compare? And the Stoics just seem to provide so much guidance when it comes to those types of decisions. I'm a big fan of the idea that our most precious things, the things that make us blessed, are still important to think of differently than virtue. And I have a very dumb example, but I think it works. I can't use anything but this example. I've used it for so many years. There was a mom in Texas. So she's called the Texas cheerleading mom on Google or what have you. You get to the news stories, who loved her daughter so much. The things we say, like, I would do anything for you, right? You're my whole life, that she hired a hitman to kill her daughter's cheerleading rival. So, I feel like we do get confused in lesser ways than that. And Aristotle's not as much help as the Stoics, who are so clear on why you would never trade off virtue for anything. And it is descriptive of us, of course, So I appreciate that they finished that thought.
And Aristotle, what would Aristotle have said to the cheerleading mom?
Of course he'd condemn it, but I think Aristotle sees some of our choices as more tragic.
Right.
Daniel Russell has done a good job of pointing this out recently, although I think Dan might agree that some choices are just tragic. So, it's not that Aristotle would approve of immoral behavior, but he would see tensions, acknowledge that we have to deal with tensions that the Stoics would suggest are not actually tensions.
Yeah. Which now that reminds me of Nussbaum. Yeah. And so what do the Stoics have a concept of the tragic? Because, that's another thing that it took me a long time to get into the Stoics, because I was really into the tragic, being like literature, philosophy grad. I
don't know. I don't know. Like I'm not good on their account of art either. And I have a student who's looking into that, and it's kind of the scholarship in classics that I'm just really behind on, but there is a Stoic account of art that I bet is informative here. And, I think accounts of the tragic, when they emerge from a theory, kind of, make space for non-explanations. Does that sound fair? Just like, and some choices are tragic, some circumstances are tragic, and that's the end of it. And of course, the Stoics will try and accommodate everything we experience in advance. So I guess in that sense, whatever they would use to describe the terrible things that happen to us, it just wouldn't be it wouldn't be the same type of explanation you get in accounts where the tragic is really built in, is what I would guess. But that's you're making me want to read more.
Yeah, I'm like, ooh, what's going on here?
I know, it's good.
What do you mean by the Stoics in advance? You said in advanced? The
Like
account, yeah.
one thing they want you to know, for example, is that your children are mortal. So I've always thought a
Right.
good branding opportunity for a Stoic would be to make little high chairs for children with like mortal written on the back. People would be outraged. But it's not
Try
bad
it,
to
Jennifer.
prepare.
Good luck.
I used to tell my kid, I mean, I've tried it. It has not backfired. We'll put it that way. But it's, it's just not conventional to remind ourselves that, we are mortal. And I do think that's one way. I mean, I know it's not appealing to people, but it's one way the Stoics are very different than, common sense. But I also find it helpful. So what I'm going to be talking about at the Stoic conference is caretaking. I'm just on a panel, and my husband recently had 2 open heart surgeries and 2 transplants, all in like, oh my goodness, like 3 years. So he's been cut open a lot. And I get asked questions about how the children and I are dealing with it. And one thing that's just true is that we never thought these things couldn't happen to us. And it wasn't like we discovered it while it was happening. There's something about being prepared that was helpful. Something about Stoicism that, I spread to them was helpful, because we didn't even have a moment or a stage where it was like, why us? It just didn't, it never became an obstacle, or there was never a time where we felt bad for ourselves like that. So it's an example, I mean, no one wants to think terrible things happen, but there's a way you're distancing yourself from people who are experiencing the terrible things all around you and always have. And by trying to suggest it's wrong to think you too, could experience those.
You've just blown my mind, because I've never really thought about tragedy like that. So tragedy is almost a resistance to paying attention to what's going on, right? Or a resistance to accepting and comprehending human nature. Like if you have that, then there's no tragedy. That's weird.
Yeah, it's to be expected. Is that
right?
I mean, yeah,
right.
I like it. And you know what else? I think people are bad on that subject. So people are afraid of death, of course, the topic of dying people, people are phobic practically. And there was this wonderful book, I should remember the title, but it was I used to think clinicians who were with patients at end of life would be very wise and would have a lot of, those kinds of what people regret kind of messages. And there's this wonderful book by a clinician who did have a career of being with people at the end of life. And he was adorably honest about how he had nothing. It was so amazing to me. It's like, you can spend a lot of time with the dying, and it's not as if philosophy just kind of accumulates, I mean, it's not as if you know what to say, physicians are still incredibly nervous. In this book, I think it was called On Death, but in this book, he admitted he's not prepared for his own death. So it wasn't at all what I, had naively hoped. But that makes me think Stoicism is all the more valuable. I mean, it's not just something you gain from experience.
I'm like thinking, apart from the fact that what would happen to like poetry and drama with, and now I'm thinking, what would the news report from a Stoic perspective? Because then there wouldn't be all these, clickbait titles, because it'd be like, yes, nature again, everyone, or something. What would the news be like?
Oh, I was just writing on this morning. I think it'd be a lot of calls for help. How nice is that? You know what I mean? It'd be calls for help. Like one thing I've been looking at is the kind of thought we apply to, like justice, actively apply, like the things people actually say, which a Stoic account lets me care about. I love that. I get to care about what people, I do read the comments. You know what I mean? I love that my ethical approach that I use, like, lets me care about what people actually say. But people actually say things about like the harshness of our criminal justice system, or the huge differences in income and wealth, like in my little community. And I feel like they're very misleading, the things people say. They'll just assume poor people deserve it, or that they work harder because they're wealthy. Just false things. And if we were Stoic, I think we would just see what was needed without, being distracted by these phony baloney, feel good or prop you up kind of stories about why things are the way they are. So I feel like Stoicism is really helpful with addicts, for example, or the people who have mental illness. It's not so dramatic. It's just a set of needs, maybe some ongoing needs, but even criminality. I mean, I think the Stoics approach is, there's evidence that we don't use it because of the way we get so twisted up and shocked, I think, by everything. So I don't think they would minimize bad things. I think they would normalize them, but hopefully people would be more practical and just kind of, fix some of the things that are missing, and that would help.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is so interesting. I wasn't expecting this conversation to go down this road, and I'm very excited. Wow. I don't know if we're going to come back to that, but I'm just sort of thinking your work on economics really is surprising, because I think the stereotypical, sort of, what you get from the Stoics is, being frugal and virtuous, and the whole concept of the indifferent suggests that one doesn't pursue indifference, or even if you do, how do you pursue indifference, etc.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, can you just give me an overview of what is a Stoic economy? What would it be like?
Well, I mean, I do think they see markets as natural. So that's like my weirdest proposal. But a lot of the commentary on Stoics on economies in the past is done by Carlo Natali. He's so good. And Tad Brennan's been really helpful to me lately, just his work on oikeiosis and indifference. And, of course, they had different systems than we did. But I am trying to push the same kind of reaction we'd have to, bad things happening in people's lives and people needing help. It does seem as if there are nice results from markets. It's a way we organize ourselves. It's not something we set up, but there's also no reason to act like markets are incapable of being regulated or meshed with other institutions. I mean, I kind of want us to take the any blinders off that would have us look at any economy or any set of markets as anything other than means to provide needed resources for a society.
Yeah.
So once again, I kind of feel my work is negative. So there are all these non-Stoic accounts that will suggest that economists are doing things wrong, or we need a better account of agency just for economics, or we need to be softer and gentler in our economics. And from a Stoic perspective, it's like, well, bring me any data, bring me any economic data you have. It's just like studying, animals. It's just like the work a biologist does. Just bring me the information about how nature's working, and then let us have the confidence to just assess how things are going by whether people have, their needs met. So like, are people safe, secure? Are they fed? Do they have a voice? The list could go on and on. It wouldn't need to be a list of non-moral goods. It could include moral goods. But what is important, I think, about the Stoic approach is that it would not be at all the suggestion that we need to increase virtue in society. Right. And I do see that blended in. You would think the Stoics would be guilty of that if anyone was. It'd be a virtue ethicist. But the Stoics do not look at communal good as a matter of virtue. They look at it as a matter of fairly distributed indifference. So I just love the idea of thinking of economics as the study of moral indifference. And, I would hope it would solve some of the kind of academic intellectual problems we've had in philosophy of economics, where there are just other proposals as to what's going on.
Jennifer, can we just quickly clarify the term indifference? I'm not sure who my audience for this podcast is going to be, but I'm hoping there might be people who are curious about Stoicism, might not know about some of the concepts. So
and indifferents are real. They're, like a lot of ideas in Stoicism, there's disagreement. It was like a living school back then. So ancient Stoics disagreed with each other over indifference. I kind of like Marcus Aurelius has an account I use a lot, but it's also confusing because there was a Christian account that emerged using the same word. I'm not sure I even have a handle on that, but it's different. It's different than the Stoic account. But the Stoic account suggests that it's just intellectually, cognitively useful for us to think of virtue as being what operates on indifference. That's one definition. And indifference being anything but our virtue. So they can be the most precious things, our daughter, but your daughter is not the same as your virtue. So wanting to do well for your daughter, or me wanting, my husband to live, didn't mean I went out and killed someone for their organs. And the limitation was not my love for him. The limitation was, the constraints of virtue. So they just think it's so important we don't muddle things by thinking we live for our daughters or we live for our husband, because if we do, it sounds beautiful and poetic. We say it plenty. We feel it maybe. But if we actually live according to that guidance, we're like Medea, we will make horrific mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's a harsh reminder to not be tempted, to value things more than our virtue.
Yeah.
But it's a hard sell, because I know that sounds selfish. People think virtue is selfish somehow, so even the way I just put that, it's like, oh, so it's all for you, right? It's like all you care about is your own agency. And of course, the content is not like that. The content is doing things for other people. So I always feel like there's, contemporary ethics, I think, makes Stoicism seem more selfish than it would otherwise, because there are these assumptions about benefiting your own agency for yourself.
But I guess there's that idea of identifying with the role that you're here to perform, let's say. So if you're a mother, a virtuous mother, then really contributes to their child's life, in a good way. And if you're here to be a teacher, then a virtuous teacher would be a teacher who really teaches well others, I guess. So it's part of
Yeah, I like it. As long as we can get free of like conventional ideas about these roles, which I think even the ancients wiggled us free from, which is great. So as long as you can understand that we get like false messaging about what a good daughter is or what a good mom is, as long as you can kind of construct the role for yourself, I find it motivating. It seems descriptive to me. I've been working a little bit on policing ethics, and police definitely do not see themselves as traders on the market. There's some descriptions of us where we're always trading up. We're always trying to profit. And they're refusing bribes. They're living up to this notion of duty they have every day on these salaries that aren't great. And, it's a really different self-understanding, even in our society, our market society. So I think the notion of roles and the duties we have from roles, it sounds old fashioned, but I do see people using them. I find it useful myself. There are things I won't do because I'm a teacher, there are just things I won't, no one's watching, no one cares, but it's like my role as a teacher is just, prominent.
There's one thing, though, that happens when you step into the role of the business person, or so you've got your own business, or you're an entrepreneur, or you're a CEO, or you're, on the board of a company. You might be a good father, but then you step into that role. There's kind of preconception, stereotype, I don't know, that you get dirty somehow because you're dealing with economics, you're dealing with profit over, you've got to serve the stakeholders, all that sort of stuff. So how can you be stoic in the corporate world, let's say?
Yeah, I think I'm probably just not an expert on that. Okay. I've got some friends in corporate roles, but I would be curious about what they see themselves as sacrificing and how they think of themselves. I'm not quite sure. I'm sure there's an answer. I would hope that Stoicism would transform some of the aims that people think they have. I have looked before at just things people have said, like, I think it was the head of a bank, maybe it was a joke, but he's like, we're doing God's work, while he was describing some really grubby, like, bending the rules kind of behavior. I mean, that made me think, there is no philosophy that is here, like there is no account of what we're doing when we profit. So I might have a pretty negative take on the set of things we believe we're doing when we're in business. I don't like the dog eat dog idea. A lot of my friends who are successful are kind of in competition with a few other people, if that seems familiar. So the rest of us were out of the running, but like what motivates them is really doing better than people they can name. That doesn't seem Stoic to me. I don't see people feeling the accomplishment that we think people will feel when they get to certain levels in society. I guess I have secondhand information on that. And that seems Stoic to me. If you think you're doing it for the accolades, like, well, it comes and goes before you get them. You can have 80 buildings. It won't feel good enough. I mean, so I worry about what people think. And I would hope that Stoicism would really help.
What would happen to the economy if we ditched profit for virtue?
Well, I mean, the Stoics are a bit free market. So they like, the profit, I think they would regard as natural. Carlo Natali's good on this, but they kind of have this, they anticipate the description Weber gave us when he talked about how, religious Presbyterians would deal with profit. You could toss it off. You could toss your wealth off like a cloak. Natali's like, the Stoics actually had this idea first. So you pursue these things, but they're indifference, which takes away, Aristotle's so good at describing economic good as a bit addictive. We get confused, an apple's good. So isn't the money that buys an apple good? So should we collect a lot of money? Yeah. You just don't even question what you're doing because money's so tricky. But for the Stoics, that would not be okay. So you'd have to be pretty aware of what resources are for. But I don't think that means it would keep people from finding products that are wanted. And there's actually a kind of approval of that from the Stoics that I wouldn't think would be from a humanist or an Aristotelian. Because if we like junky music or something, what do my kids like? If there's some trend that every 18-year-old is chasing, the Stoics don't care. And then, an Aristotelian might be like, I don't approve of that product, but there's something natural about providing it for the Stoics that is not, it doesn't have to be moralized. It's like those are, it's like we can garden for people who want the products of the garden, even if we don't, so kind of let them make their plans, which I find that exciting. I mean, I love that. I really like it in contrast to some of the mainstream approaches to ethics and economics.
Yeah. What about the idea, like a number of the ancient Stoics sort of gave away their wealth. I mean, I don't know if they gave it away, but they just didn't claim it. And I know that I'm not suggesting that Wittgenstein was a Stoic, but he also sort of didn't take his wealth. But is there kind of a sense that as a Stoic, if you happen to come across money, wealth, you should either just leave it if you choose, or that maybe if you happen to come across that money, you should actually do something productive, like with it? Is there a utilitarian sense in Stoicism, or is it just virtue?
Yes, there is. No, there is. And, this is, I feel like kind of unsettled territory, but I've been looking at Cicero and, he'll talk about social utility. And that's one thing we could do with wealth we accumulate. Of course, we aren't going to have any weird attachments to our wealth. I mean, you're more free as a Stoic because you're not going to fall into the trap of thinking, I think people do this with their cars. Once you get a nice car, you're not more free in a Stoic sense. You're less. My test of this with students is always, have they been in a terrible car? I use the word jalopy. They have no idea what I'm talking about. But, usually most Americans have been in some terrible car. I know, I thought that was the term. But usually they've been in a terrible car. And I ask if they have a nice car or not. If they have a nice car and they've had to go in a terrible car, they're incredibly self-conscious. Does that make sense? They're looking around. Who's going to see me? But if you have a terrible car And then you get a ride in a really nice car. You don't feel self-conscious at all. And you can go back to your terrible car. So those sorts of reminders of what it really means to be free, I think, are so important with wealth. But then my frustrating answer, I just had a critic really annoyed by this in Stoicism, is, that it depends. And I don't know how to make that more palatable to people who want answers, but I love about Stoicism that it depends. And my favorite example of it is, if you're an ancient Stoic, you might get told, don't use gold wine goblets, you big show off. You only need silver ones. Like, it's a waste, and you're showing off, and that's bad for you. Actually, it feels good, but it's bad for you. And that's great once you've been given the advice, but before you haven't been given the advice, it's just not even active yet in your practical rationality. So it's not like you would get blamed for something you aren't exposed to. And then, of course, you could process that advice, and it's going to be complicated. Everyone's situation is going to be different, and you very well might have excuses for the gold. But I know that's, people don't find that fun in ethics at all.
What about if your child goes to school? Okay, I'm taking it to the domestic budget now. What about if your child, is at school and everyone's got, I don't know what the new thing is lately.
Yeezy tennis shoes.
Right. Yeah. What are they?
Yeezy.
Oh, Yeezy.
I think they're,
right.
Yeah.
I'm glad I didn't say Nike. That must be so 80s, right? Okay, so what do you do? How do you manage a budget at home when children are in a situation where they may feel shamed? You're not going to give them the lentil bowl for them to cross the schoolyard with, are you?
Yeah, right. When it comes to these topics, I'm really skeptical myself about advice from people, because I always want to know how it works out. The people who give advice often, I think, are the ones who need it the most, have you noticed that? I think I've read something on it. If you need advice, you will be more likely to say it. You'll give it, so I am worried that my motivations might be strange, but I have tried that on my kids. And I do have some applications of Stoicism there. Like, I think it's bad for kids to be spoiled. And that seems real to me. I mean, spoiled meaning they can't enjoy the little things. They aren't grateful. So my poor kids living with a woman academic, they're thrilled to find milk in the fridge. But I'm glad that they feel a little lucky when I've gotten 2 cartons of milk and they've got a whole day to relax, because it makes them grateful for little things. And then when it comes to poor people in our community, I have been, firm with my children that if they get nice things, it will make other people feel bad about themselves. So I like to attach that, like they're in a society, and if they get the little quick, boost from having the great thing, and then the video game. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's so hard for kids who can't afford the video games when they're the one into the video. So I think they've been good about that. Not that we have a ton of resources and it'd be a real challenge, but I just thought it was a message it stuck. You know what I mean? Anything you get that makes you feel special, that's material, is bound to pose a challenge for these kids who, definitely deserve more.
I have another question for you, because you're spinning my mind now. So I loved what you said before about indifference and the free market, and that, it's okay, produce that product, that's fine. Someone might want it, whatever. I'm fine. What happens then in marketing and advertising where the communication there and the invitation is that this is essential?
Yeah.
And you need this to be beautiful, happy, whatever it is.
Yes.
What would a Stoic marketer or social media marketer, how would they do advertising if they were a Stoic?
Oh my gosh, that is the best question. I love that. I mean, I can imagine them, the boring answer, like I can imagine it going both ways, but I can see a social marketer justifying what she did, even if she's very successful at getting people to think they need something to make their room beautiful. Because just how you put it, it's like, well, I mean, we have to do something, you know, we might as well, like, you know, if they can, if they're on the uptake for this idea of a beautiful room, this is the trend right now, and it doesn't, you know, mislead them about happiness, who cares? But then even if they do get misled about happiness, which I guess a lot of advertising does, I know this makes me sound mean, but when people complain that society should make it easier, I just kind of get stoic about it. I mean, a lot of like the cultural warriors and stuff, like I see the complaints as really childish. Like, I need society to be different for me because it makes it hard if society doesn't accommodate my attempt to find. You know, it's like, well, it's always going to be difficult, and it's been much more difficult in the past. And I'm not sure the difficulty of figuring out your own guidance in life is a negative when it comes to figuring out your own. So I know television advertising and, you know, screens are tempting. One thing I did with my kids is I really kept them away from screens. We didn't have any television for years and years. And I thought, you know, that's fair. Like little kids do get sucked up and they don't really have, you know, the ability to say no to these messages the way they work. It was so funny to see what their like requests for Christmas would be when they had no TV. It'd be things like a wedding dress, a rare pearl. I mean, it wasn't toys, you know, they just weren't seeing the advertising, which was wonderful.
I love that.
Now they're very online, of course, but I do kind of see it as just a challenge and like one we can, you know, be creative about. If you're getting, if you're, you know, looking at magazines too much and, you know, it's really bringing you down and you're distracted from what you need to do. It's like so easy to correct it.
Before we move on from the economics discussion, Adam Smith, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know, but he was influenced by Marcus Aurelius via the Scottish Enlightenment guys. Christian Stoicism? Yeah. Any comments on that? I'm got no idea. But
I've tried to figure it out. Well, I'm in the same position you are.
I have read the Hutchison translation, which it's called the Glasgow translation. Because I live in Scotland now. When I moved to Scotland almost 3 years ago, came across the Glasgow translation. I think it's maybe 17, well, Enlightenment years, when's that? And so it was Hutchison and some other guys, so two Enlightenment scholars, and Adam Smith was a student of the Hutchison guy.
Yeah, I mean, he really was inspired by Stoicism. I mean, here's something that confuses me. He doesn't seem to think it applies to all people. It's like, you know, for philosophical types or kind of the high-minded. And then most people can't appreciate it. But that always seems so strange to me. You know, I'm like, yeah, Adam Smith, why would Stoicism not apply to all people? So I always feel he has something more in mind about Stoicism than I can figure out. But it's hard. I've been trying to figure out his Stoicism, and it's so hard because I feel he's so subtle and sophisticated. So, you know, it's like trying to look underneath the his complicated layers to figure out if there's some unstated influence. You know, he mentions, I've looked at every place he mentions Stoics, but is there an unstated influence? And then this is a little harsh, but a lot of times the Adam Smith scholars, I mean, some of them are so amazing, but sometimes they're not interested in Stoicism themselves, you know, so that it's not like the secondary literature has been incredibly helpful to me. It's almost like we need a Stoic to go through Smith and really definitively figure out the Stoicism in Smith.
Wow, who's going to do that?
I know, I'm not up for it. I think that would take a lifetime or two.
You're currently working on a book called, where I got my notes here, which looks very interesting. Economics and Moral Indifferents. So that's basically going to be your theory of the markets as... Yes,
I was trying to remember what title I had down. It's really like my business ethics class. We kind of go through the way people have thought about morality in the market since ancient times, you know, so we you know, do Aristotle, Mandeville, and get up to Marx and Hayek and game theory. And I like it. I mean, I hope people like it. And then, of course, I think the Stoic option is the best, but I'm trying to figure out.
I love the way you say that.
How
of
firm
course,
I should be.
Of course. And you do Friedman and all those, like Milton Friedman and that,
yeah,
right?
I actually don't think I talk about him. I probably mention him, but I don't think I look at him much. I mean, I use Hayek for the defense of the free market, which I always think Hayek fits pretty well with Stoic defenses of markets because there's information we get just from being able to act among each other, and it's not information any one person had, it's not top-down information. So I always think that fits pretty well with the same description of discovery in Cicero, where we kind of discover what our rights are, that type of thing. So I'm hoping to make those connections, but they probably won't be in this little book.
So because my knowledge is not, I'm not, an economist by any, so the liberalism, is that Milton Friedman?
Yeah. What do I think of? I guess I
Does
think
that
of him
fit
as
into your business class? And then do you provide Stoicism as the antidote
He has a really famous article in Business Ethics, but it's almost, and I think we do usually teach it, but it's real easy for philosophy students to kind of tear apart. It was kind of for the public, and it's just kind of the suggestion that you can pass the buck, and it's like the idea that shareholders are like owners. It's actually not representative, I think, of his best work. So that's a bit of an obstacle. I mean, it's it's a defense of like corporate structures as they are, and he kind of admits there have to be exceptions. So it's not really meaty for a philosopher.
So do you see your Stoic business course becoming like widely taught?
No.
Come on, I had faith. Because
I mean, I can't even get other ethicists to tolerate talk of virtue. Like I really feel it's an uphill battle. I mean, some of the virtue ethicists writing today, I mean, their work is amazing. I mean, it just measures up to anything we've ever had on virtue, but people don't like to learn new things. Our audience is probably, other philosophers who are already invested in an approach that, is at odds with virtue. So I really feel we're kind of at the bottom of the hill in trying to popularize this approach. And of course, I kind of like the eudaimonist approach. So maybe virtue is more commonly talked about, but then if you like the particular account of virtue that Aristotle, the Stoics, and the Epicureans were promoting, you don't have many built-in fans in philosophical ethics. You have skeptics and you have people who don't want to learn it. It's annoying. People want to think they know Aristotle, they never need to look again, that type of thing. So what do you do to convince people to be patient with Stoicism when they already have 8 things that they laugh about with Stoicism and their own approach to develop? So that's kind of my conundrum. I need a marketing team.
Yeah, you need to get to work on that. We need a revolution.
It is exciting that Stoicism has become more generally popular, because I didn't see that coming. And we used to laugh in graduate school, oh, if only. I mean, we used to think, what if athletes found out about this? They would really like it. And now, I mean, it just happened. I mean, it's amazing what we used to just literally imagine and laugh at ourselves for imagining. There is a lot of traction now. I mean, it does have popular appeal. I don't think that's reached, philosophical ethics, academic work, but it's something big.
Yeah. And there's even at the conference on June the 5th, I've got a creative writing background. So the creativity panel is going to be interesting, and I'm really interested in what Stoicism can say for the creatives.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the conversation is broadening. Are your children fans of you and Stoicism?
I think so.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they don't sit down and they won't let me read their papers or anything. My son's in a philosophy class. I haven't even seen a paragraph he's written. So, they want to find things on their own. But I think it's definitely the worldview we discuss. Like they're on the same page with me. I mean, I do think it's true. And, you know, I've like dropped it at any chance I can. So, you know, they just had, their grandfather just passed away. And like, I mean, some of the kind of preparation for that loss, I really think is, evident. They were very calm with their dad in the hospital all this time. I mean, they weren't scared. You know, of course, all this, they're still growing. So this isn't that example of like, don't give advice when you're in the middle of life, like who knows, but I haven't regretted any Stoic messaging, that's for sure.
Do you have a comment on age and Stoicism? I feel that, so I've met people who felt that even though they didn't know, they feel that they've always been Stoic, or at least inclined to Stoicism. Bill Irving calls himself a congenital Stoic.
Yes.
For me, it's kind of kicked in, like I'm 50, and only in the last 4 or 5 years I felt could do that. Whereas before I was really just capital T tragedy, capital R romantic. Do you think Stoicism is easier with age? And for those who feel that they've got a real intuitive sense of Stoicism as kids, what's happening there? Is age a factor? The wisdom gene kicks in at, late middle life? What do you think?
I mean, depressingly, I don't see older people getting any wiser in general, but I do see some of our distractions slipping away, so like losing your beauty and attractiveness, all my girlfriends eventually go through this. Some of us on very different timelines, but it is a wake up call. The world feels different. Like you just get different things. For young people, I've noticed it with my son, that all the men in my life laugh about how they thought they'd be great baseball stars. There's a point where your dreams fade, your expectations fade. And I feel like any losses like that, especially when they, don't shake you to your core, going bald, that kind of thing. It can help, right? I mean, if you're going to keep going on and you thought your hair was so important and then you discover it's not, and there you are, and you still have everything you could have ever wanted to do that you consider good, really. I mean, I feel like those are all important lessons. I just don't think people always, are more likely to turn to Stoicism. So, I don't know what lights the fire, makes people think like a Stoic, but those lessons could be helpful. And as just one example in response to your description of these natural Stoics, I absolutely believe I've run into so many. And we just had a civil rights protester arrested when he was 13, when he was with his family. His family got blackballed. And I mean, it was very treacherous for him. He would win basketball games and get called terrible names. So he's, he still seems like a young guy to me, but he's older and just spoke to my class. And the Serenity Prayer had been his strength. So Stoic. I sent him some Stoicism and he's like, oh yeah. So I do find that people who have made it through really difficult times without rancor and bitterness and I don't know, just this kind of amazing commitment to, Kristen Monroe calls it common humanity. She finds it in these really heroic types. But I just feel you can almost, she had something in her book that people who take in other people's children, that coincides with this heroic behavior and also this common humanity. It's things like that. Like, when you see a person not attached to their wealth or generous or unashamed, I always suspect a bit of natural Stoicism.
I love that. I love that idea. I want to talk to you about, you mentioned that you can laugh at yourself, and that's really, laughter is really quite, a Stoic approach to life, maybe.
And people don't know
laughter, and what sort of laughter? How do you do that? Do you have a laughing practice?
Well, I do assume like we have different personalities that can be fit to Stoicism, as easily as any personality can be fit as easily as any other personality. So, I certainly have some friends and colleagues that are grumpy, so they're not big laughers, and some of them are Stoic. But I do think there's something philosophical about laughing. I wouldn't want to borrow from Buddhism illicitly or anything, but I do think it's important. And I'm trying to think if I've seen anyone write on this, and I feel like I haven't. But it reveals an attitude. If the Stoics recommend joy. I with my parenting, I'm a little bit crabby about, this sounds like a paradox, but about being cheerful. Some religious types do that, and I like it. It's just like you're around other people, like, let's have a little energy here.
Yeah.
I think that's okay with Stoicism. It would just be one of your personas and one of your social behaviors, but I like it. Helps everyone, helps you, helps other people. So I like laughers. My husband's more sensitive to it, and he can't stand someone who doesn't laugh in a conversation, which I think is going a little far, but he's been very consistent about this.
There's an ancient account. Well, first of all, Matt Sharp, who teaches down under is he in Melbourne? He spoke at Athens Stoicon in 2019, or was it 2018, 2019? Get my dates mixed up post-COVID. So he spoke on comedy, and I can't really remember which text it appears in, but there's an account of the view from above. I can't remember who, it's some ancient text, and whoever sort of has this viewpoint from above actually looks down and has the urge to just laugh at, not in a ha-ha mean way, but in a that's get it, it's funny, like that kind of sense of detachment, that laughter, like looking at yourself from a distance and then just seeing how small and your concerns are, then that relief, that laughter might
it's a bit of courage, I think. Like Camus, I think I do much better finding the Stoicism in Camus than Adam Smith, but he really seems inspired by the Stoics. Sometimes he'll have a character voice Stoicism, and literature is hard for me because it's like, I want to know if that's what Camus was agreeing with, or is this just a character but his kind of defiant laugh always seemed very Stoic to me, because what are the alternatives? It's brave, if your last moment is something ridiculous, which happens, you have to be prepared. I think it might be from the same book I was mentioning before on dying. And, people die in embarrassed positions. It's embarrassing to be in a hospital. You've got the gown open in the back and stuff. And that book wasn't about Stoicism, but I thought how a Stoic would really just accept that kind of thing with no it doesn't reduce your dignity for your gown to be opened at the end. There's just a different focus. And I thought, well, how nice that Stoicism is freeing even at the end in those sorts of circumstances. A Stoic, it just wouldn't care if they were caught in that kind of, conventionally embarrassing situation at the end of their life or ever, probably.
Well, since you've taken us to that moment at the end of our life, is there something in Stoicism that concerns itself with our reputation after life? I feel that there is.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking
a reputation after life.
Yeah. So who says it? Is it Seneca who says that you can't know if a person's lived a good life until after they've died? So then you take the full account into it, and then there's a
Aristotle,
sense of,
maybe.
Was it?
Maybe.
So do you feel that, is there a sense that what people say about you after you die, would the Stoics be concerned about that?
I would have thought they wouldn't, but I am open, and they say a lot of things. But I would have thought they wouldn't need the approval of people generally, that our reputations being precious is kind of a non-Stoic thing. On the other hand, it sounds like you were about to tell us, and I'm not letting you, but you won't generate your own bad reputation through Stoicism, so you're safe from some of the really terrible reputations we can develop, because you just won't be contributing to it. So it's not like someone will find out the truth. And so it's, it's like you can be secure that your true reputation is an honorable one. And at the same time, you're not like, Plato will describe straw puppets blowing in the wind. You're not trying to, get likes every moment and adjusting yourself to a new audience. Okay. I think those two things are complicated, but I'm going to throw in a third thing that's complicated. I think the Stoics, they do want us to fit into society, just not in conventional ways, not in harmful ways. But I do think that gets ignored by contemporary ethicists. I know that's not a huge number of people, but I don't know, like social media, I feel is some sort of meaningful feedback, accommodate some of that feedback.
Yeah.
Which I know that's not popular to say, but.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Social media. I'm thinking of Seneca now in his letters, and he sort of said that when he was writing to Lucilius, I think Lucilius was trying to get his reputation happening so he could be remembered after death or something. And Seneca was like, forget it all, just focus on learning, being a good person. Yeah. You know what? Keep writing to me because I know that my letters will be read after I die. So I'll mention your name and you will be remembered.
I see.
So what's going on?
And for what you truly are, the misinterpretations will disappear and people's weird motivations for how they think of you will disappear.
Yeah.
I thought of the Stoics because my husband got organ transplants. I'm now really involved with groups of people who donate their organs, sometimes even to strangers. I mean, I'm just in awe of them. Talk about dedication to common humanity. And believe it or not, they don't like to post what they've done on social media because they get so much anger.
Oh.
Yeah.
They get anger.
People are jealous or I don't know. I mean, I just keep thinking about what people are like. Like you can donate a kidney to a stranger and, your friends on social media are going to try and put you down for it somehow, some way. And it's like, okay, that's a very good reminder. So if you think you're going to be able to trust, other people's opinions of you, all I have to do is think of how these people get treated. It's like, okay, I have no chance.
Yeah. I love that idea of like just thinking it could be worse off. Like it just seems like counterproductive, but actually it's an instant fix strategy, isn't it? Like it could be worse. Yeah.
Yes. And maybe that's where some humor comes in.
Yes, definitely. Who is your favorite Stoic philosopher? Dead or alive?
Alive. I mean, I love Julia Annis. I love her. I just love her. Everything she writes, like it just like goes down like, cream. I just love everything she writes, everything. And I love Martha Nussbaum, who's Stoic-like, for ancient philosophers, I like Musonius Rufus just because I've been trying to apply Stoicism. So, it's not like I'd recommend those chapters to anybody, but they've been helpful to me.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So what's been the most helpful in the Musonius?
I mean, just like his advice on like how to raise your daughters, anything applied, like how to react when your child is sick, the advice on marriage, I just like seeing how he will use different social norms and then sort through them with his audience, whoever the audience was. I feel like that's a good example of how we need to practically reason. And then he's passed away, but Larry Becker's A New Stoicism is what I really use in research because he lays everything out. And I know it's not exactly the same as like Julia Annis's approach, but it's so helpful to me because he's counted up all the moves in the argument. So easy to refer to.
I love the idea of, so I know that your work is academic, but do you provide kind of pop versions of what you do, like how to do's for the rest of us?
Not really. I mean, I write for Psychology Today's blog, but I don't know. I mean, Stoicism's a very hard sell. Like, I really admire all of you who are making it more popular. I mean, sometimes Stoic suggestions just seem so off. Like, it was years ago, but I wrote about, it was a little girl who was worried she was heavy, and her mom was reporting to the news about it. And maybe, I'm not even sure I remember the circumstance, but it was not a Stoic way to handle the situation. The mom was kind of like, it does matter that you're heavy and society needs to something. you know, it just seemed to me that like they were creating the idea that this really mattered for this child. But, you know, I don't feel like that kind of thing goes over so well. Like people don't even like when my kids didn't have TV, like people don't like that. You know, I mean, it's fun. I don't know what people want, but I don't think your Stoicism sounds difficult. So I guess it would be like someone healthy telling me that I should run 12 miles a day. You know, it's like, okay, all right, thanks. You know, so I'm never quite sure how to sell it, but I sure do have a lot of students who appreciate it when they read it, you know, the process of reading the ancient texts. And I get a lot of them saying they had a family member who they thought of as Stoic and that they always admired them and now they get it. But it's a hard sell. I mean, even to myself, but yeah.
Well, you've sold me. I'm just like, yeah, I want some of that. I want all of that. On a daily level, I know that you're constantly teaching and writing about Stoicism, but when it's you personal level, what do you do? How do you do your practice? Do you have a practice? Do you do something every day? Do you sometimes?
No, I feel like a pretty bad person, to tell you the truth, because I think I have a lot of natural virtue in Aristotle's sense. Like I don't have agendas. Like, you know, I don't get jealous. I'm real open with my friends, but I think, and I have plenty of friends, but I think that's kept me from being as virtuous as I could be. You know, I just have other things that prop me up. So Stoicism's really helped me in difficult moments. And I'm so grateful for it there, but I feel like, you know, I haven't done enough of the work, that's for sure. And the work I would like to do is to kind of, you know, just sort through more of what it's right and wrong for me to support and for me to do, not in like retrospect, but, you know, in advance. So I always feel like, you know, it's always a list of things I could do thanks to Stoicism to get better.
So do you have a list to share, or is that?
I mean, that's how lazy I am. It's like, no, not really. But I'm trying to think of examples. I don't know. I mean, I know I just handle things too easily. Like I recently knew I was going to lose a potential friend or friendly colleague because I thought the person did something really unethical. And it was like, do I do anything? Do I say, you know, so much easier to do nothing. And it's not like Stoicism suggests one answer to any of these cases, but that was a case where I just chose to do the right thing, even though there were negative consequences for me. But I don't know, like, I'm not sure I'm strong enough or practiced enough to have done that if it didn't seem readily available to me, you know?
Like, so, I mean, intuitively, like already learned. Yeah.
I was already close to doing it. Yeah. So I could support it with like some thought, but it's like, I was probably pretty close already.
But then the Stoic approach really doesn't suggest that it has to always be hard to make the choice, does it? It could.
No, that makes me feel better. No, I mean, I just imagine I'm not as practically rational as I should be.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I'm like,
that's interesting because I ran this journaling workshop at Stoic X last year, just online. And a lot of the sort of Stoic academics, etc., because we're talking about writing as a daily practice, you know, journaling is big, and the pop side of things where I fit in.
Yes.
And a lot of the academics did not have a daily journaling practice, did not have sort of a practice, wrote, you know, prolifically books, journal articles, blog posts, etc. And that was quite interesting. Even like Chris Gill, for example, said, you know, Kathryn, I don't, but, you know, and had so much great input for us all. So it was just wonderful for him to share that. But it was interesting because a lot of the Stoic work that he does is at the level of, you know, writing books that help the rest of us.
Maybe that helps. It is like, it's funny, like what you avoid might not be so noticeable. You know, like I don't get entangled in dramatic things. You know, I don't feel anger hardly ever, you know, so it's like, I think sometimes, and especially when I was younger, you're kind of caught up in those things. So you need to get out of them, but maybe they're, you know, I have no idea if it has to do with age, but maybe if you're avoiding those entanglements, that kind of emotional chaos, you hardly notice, maybe.
Well, that's interesting, though, because I'm thinking as where I am now in life, my age, experience, whatever, I like emotional regulation and getting involved in weird entanglements or feeling weird about things. I don't feel that anymore. So that's why I feel like Stoicism is maybe makes sense to me right now. So maybe it is a bit of age, maybe it's, whereas as a teen who was high in living life, I felt that I had to experience it in full, like the highs and the lows. And I think that comes from that kind of capital A art background and all that sort of stuff. But that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Although before
I see doing a lot of things as Stoic too. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, doing a lot of things.
Being brave and doing things when you're young, it's Stoic because you're not afraid. I mean, I think that's kind of a Stoic motto. Like, what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid to do all this? Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
The partiers can be Stoics.
Oh my God. I could keep you on for another 2 hours with that comment. That's interesting. Yeah, fair enough. That's just made me rethink my entire life to date. Good. It hasn't been wasted. It's been Stoic to a certain extent. All right.
No, that's right.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you a real quickie. You'll be talking at the Stoic on Next Women Conference, and you're going to talk about raising children and caretaking.
Caretaking, yes. I kind of had my husband's transplant journey in mind, but I'll blend the two.
Oh.
I find Stoicism helpful for both of those things.
Yeah. Well, feel free to focus on whichever story you prefer.
Great. Well, there are overlaps.
Yeah.
They're caretaking groups that and they use a lot of Stoicism, even though they don't know it. Same thing with my friend who was a protester in the civil rights era. They don't realize they're Stoics, but they are saying all the things. Yeah. They're coping the way you'd want them to.
They don't realize they're Stoics. I love that. All right. Jennifer, it's an absolute pleasure. They thought, I'm strong and fearless. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for this chat. My head really is buzzing. Yeah. Do you want to say anything to the listeners? Like, what's the thing that you want us to know about? Where should we go and check you out?
I wouldn't check me out as much as I have been recommending The Morality of Happiness by Julia Annis. It's 1993. It's very difficult. I don't think it's a read-alone book. I obviously love a university class. Like, it helps to read it with other people and maybe even with some instructors, maybe more than one. But I would really recommend people approach Stoicism from that book because it just gives you such a detailed map of the landscape that you would never go wrong after getting through it, even if you get little tidbits here and there, or find a favorite author here or there, find a confusing passage. So it's really anchoring. It's really good.
Well,
that's what I'd recommend.
All right. I haven't read that, so I'm going to pop off.
It's thick.
Make a purchase. It's thick, is it? All right.
Yeah.
All right. And thanks for
you couldn't even teach it. Not even in a semester. It'd be like a year-long course. So just be prepared.
Wow. That sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much. And if I don't see you before the conference, I'll see you then.
Great. This was such a pleasure. It's so nice talking to you.
Yeah. And hopefully we can do it again. Yeah.
Everyone's going to want to do your podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right. And see you soon.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.